In the final, desperate days of World War II, on the island of Saipan, a story of unexpected humanity unfolded amidst the chaos of conflict. In a makeshift hospital ward filled with Japanese prisoners of war, a moment of profound silence fell. A silence that spoke louder than any battle cry. It was a moment when American soldiers, their supposed enemies, gently lifted the frail body of a dying Japanese girl, and in that simple act, revealed a truth that transcends borders and uniforms. This is the story of that silence, of the tears that followed, and of a shared humanity discovered in the most unlikely of places. The battle for Saipan in 1944 was one of the fiercest in the Pacific War. The fighting was brutal, and the cost in human lives was staggering. For the American forces, capturing the island was a crucial step toward victory. For the Japanese defenders and the civilians caught in the crossfire, it was a fight to the death, fueled by propaganda that painted the Americans as inhuman monsters. Many Japanese civilians, terrified by these stories, chose to take their own lives rather than surrender. But not everyone did. Thousands were captured, many of them wounded, sick, and starving. They were brought to hastily constructed POW camps, where they expected the worst. Among them were many women and children, civilians who had been living on the island. They were terrified, exhausted, and utterly defeated. Their world had been shattered, and now they were in the hands of the very people they had been taught to fear and hate. One of these camps housed a large group of female prisoners. They were crowded into a makeshift ward, a simple structure that did little to keep out the tropical heat. The air was thick with the smell of sickness and despair. The women were gaunt, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. They spoke in hushed tones, sticking close together, finding solace in their shared misery. They had lost their homes, their families, and their country. All they had left was each other. The American soldiers assigned to guard and care for them were young men, far from home, who had just witnessed the horrors of combat. They were trained to fight, not to be nurses or caretakers. They faced a wall of suspicion and hostility from the prisoners. Communication was nearly impossible, a chasm of language and culture separating them. The soldiers did their best, providing food, water, and basic medical care. But the atmosphere was tense, thick with unspoken animosity. Among the prisoners was a young woman who was gravely ill. She was barely more than a girl, her body racked with a high fever from a severe infection. Her condition worsened with each passing day. Her friends in the ward did what they could, sharing their meager rations, wiping her brow with damp rags, and whispering words of comfort. They watched over her with a fierce, protective loyalty, their collective grief and anxiety focused on her fragile life. For them, she was a symbol of their own suffering, a sister in their shared ordeal. The American medics knew she was fading. They had given her what medicine they had, but the infection was too powerful. There was little more they could do. The young woman lay on a simple cot, her breathing shallow, her eyes half closed. Her friends gathered around her, their faces etched with sorrow. They knew the end was near. The entire ward seemed to hold its breath, a heavy, somber stillness settling over the crowded space. It was in this moment that two American soldiers entered the ward, Te-Weretal, imposing figures in their military uniforms. The Japanese women instinctively drew back, their fear palpable. The soldiers approached the sick girl's cot. A wave of alarm and suspicion rippled through the prisoners. What were they going to do? Were they going to take her away? Their experience had taught them to expect only cruelty from their captors. One of the soldiers knelt down beside the cot. He wasn't a medic, just a regular guy. He looked at the dying girl, and then at the anxious faces of the women surrounding her. He said something to his companion, his voice low and gentle. The other soldier nodded. Then, with the utmost care, the two men reached down. One slid his arms under the girl's shoulders, the other under her legs. Very slowly, very gently, they lifted her from the cot. A collective gasp went through the ward. The women stared, frozen in disbelief. They expected roughness, a callous disregard for the dying. But what they saw was the opposite. The soldiers held the girl's frail body with a tenderness one might reserve for a beloved family member. Their movements were slow and deliberate, their faces filled not with malice, but with a quiet, respectful sorrow. As they held her, the girl's simple straw mat, which had been her bed, was left behind. The soldiers paused, looking at the bare cot. One of them gestured to the women, then to the mat. Understanding dawned on the prisoners' faces. He wanted them to place the mat back on the cot. One of the older women, her hands trembling, stepped forward and straightened the mat. The soldiers then, with that same incredible gentleness, lowered the girl back onto her bed, carefully adjusting her position to make her as comfortable as possible. And then it happened. The silence. The entire ward fell completely, utterly silent. The low murmur of whispers, the soft groans of the sick, the rustling of Bodhi-zit. All stopped. In that profound quiet, every woman in the room stared at the two American soldiers. They were no longer seeing uniforms. They were no longer seeing enemies. They were seeing two human beings performing an act of simple, profound kindness for another. They had expected brutality. They had been prepared for indifference. They had never, in their wildest imaginings, expected compassion. This small, gentle act lifting a dying girl to straighten her shattered their preconceptions. It broke through the walls of hatred and fear that the war had built. In that moment of shared humanity, they saw not American monsters, but men. Men who could feel empathy. Men who could show respect for the dying. The silence was finally broken by a sound. A soft, choked sob. One of the women, her face buried in her hands, began to weep. Then another, and another. Soon, the entire ward was filled with the sound of quiet, heartbroken crying. But these were not just tears of grief for their dying friend. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a profound and overwhelming emotional release. They were crying for the kindness they had just witnessed. A kindness they thought no longer existed in the world. The two soldiers stood awkwardly for a moment, clearly moved and a little overwhelmed by the reaction they had caused. They hadn't done it for praise. It was a simple, instinctive gesture of decency. They looked at the weeping women, gave a slight, respectful nod, and then quietly left the ward. The young woman passed away peacefully a short time later, but the memory of that moment lingered. The story of the two soldiers and their simple act of kindness spread throughout the camp. It was a small crack in the dam of hatred, letting a trickle of understanding flow through. For the Japanese prisoners, it was a revelation. It taught them that their enemies were not the one-dimensional demons of propaganda, but complex human beings, capable of both terrible violence and profound tenderness. For the American soldiers, encounters like these were also transformative. They were forced to look beyond the enemy combatant and see the suffering civilian, the grieving mother, the frightened child. These moments of connection, however fleeting, chipped away at the dehumanizing nature of war, reminding them of the common humanity that bound them even to their foes. This story, preserved in the accounts of those who were there, is more than just a wartime anecdote. It's a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It shows that even in the darkest of times, amidst the most brutal of conflicts, empathy can survive. A simple act of kindness can bridge the widest divides, and a moment of shared humanity can shine a light that no amount of darkness can extinguish. The silence in that Saipan ward, followed by the sound of weeping, was the sound of a profound truth being rediscovered. That beyond our flags, our languages, and our loyalties, we are all, in the end, simply human. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of our shared history.